Hello, and welcome to Unsheathed with your hosts, Kyell and K.M. We hope that you enjoy the program. Please stick around afterwards. There'll be cake and blowjobs.
Hi, welcome to Unsheathed, episode number 83.
That's 3 times 7.
Yes, it is. I don't know, multiplication challenged Kyle Gold.
And I've never learned how to do math, K.M. Hirosaki.
And we're joined tonight by a very special guest who is always with us, but is no less special for that. Welcome, tech-savvy Wolf Kit, who has a microphone in front of him.
Good evening, Kyle.
It's like how after Obi-Wan Kenobi is dead, but he appears to Luke as a spirit on Dagobah.
And who had 15 seconds in the poll.
Well, considering that we had that one episode where you called out how late into the episode we went, I intentionally wanted to get one right at the starting gate.
Our listeners are going to start a game whereby they predict how far into the episode a Star Wars reference comes up. And we'll have to just
I would rig the betting pool.
Yeah, you have to not bet. We have to not.
I have too many alts on taps, and I could totally
Well, they won't do it on taps.
But taps is made for doing it. Oh, wait. That isn't what you meant.
No. All right. We're into, well, technically not quite yet into summer, but
no, not yet.
California doesn't seem to know that we're supposed to be close.
God, it feels like it's January.
I know, seriously.
The weather?
It was almost 50 degrees the other day.
It was pouring rain, too.
I've been kind of puttering on a couple different projects here and there. Both of the latest things I finished are out being either not being thought about by me or being read by other people. So I'm looking forward to Rocky Mountain FurCon, which happens in just over 2 months, at which will be guest of honor. And hopefully Rukus and I are planning a couple panels that should be a lot of fun, and we hope to have a good time. KM?
Let's see. So my current quest, dare I call it a mission, is to finish my current draft of Summerhill before I leave for Anthrocon, which is in about 2 weeks. And I think I can do it. I think that at the pace I've been going over the last week or so, and knowing how much is left of the story, I think it will be possible.
Godspeed, Sir Otter.
I want this story to be done. I'm so sick of it.
So do all our listeners.
Yeah, but
I mean, they're not sick of it, but they just
no.
want
I
it
mean,
to be
the thing is, they playfully tease me, "Hey, come on, when are you going to finish it?" I'm like, "I promise you, I want this done faster than you want it." It's but no, actually, just last night I posted my in progress chapter 1 online, which hasn't really gotten a lot of response yet. A, because it's only been up for a day, and
go look at it right now.
B, because when you post things over the weekend, I notice people don't notice them very readily.
Also, Califer's going on this weekend, so I'm...
Oh, that's true. How many people does Califer get?
I don't know, at least 20.
Yeah. Down in SoCal, so far from our mountain bunker.
I know. It's sad. And Kit is on the show for a reason.
Hi, Kyle. So the projects I've been working on are kind of refocusing on Unsheathed a bit. So we've had a request about the teaser episode, which I had hinted at, probably a couple months ago at this point.
Yep.
I'm good at teasing.
So
we'll put that to the test next week.
Yes, indeed. So the challenge will be, so what we're going to do is in episode 84, Kyell and K.M. Hirosaki are both going to have kind of basically their teaser of their pitch for each of their 2 respective books. I think
the pitch would be something that we would present to somebody who we wanted to take an interest in the book. Something like that we would give to an editor or a publisher.
Right. So basically, it's kind of the way we think of it in the business world is the elevator pitch. So basically, you're in an elevator, you've hit 10th level, you got in on the first level, and you have that long to give your pitch before they walk out of the elevator.
I think the example that I'd always heard around here was you get in the elevator and Steve Jobs gets in the elevator with you. You have until you get to the ground floor to tell him about your brilliant idea and make him interested in it. But it could apply to anything. If you're in LA, you get on the elevator and Steven Spielberg walks on with you, and he's like, man, I wish I could find something to do for my next movie project. You have, 2 minutes to convince him that your story is the one that he wants to film.
You get onto a turbo lift and Luke Skywalker walks on. You have 30 seconds to convince him why you should be a Jedi.
Exactly. So this is our first round. So we're actually going to do a little bit longer than 30 seconds. I was thinking 2 minutes, but keeping in mind...
And is that a hard limit?
It is a hard limit. So
Okay.
2 minutes, anything over 2 minutes, cut right there. So
Awesome.
I recommend... So what we're going to do is actually, during the summer, I'm going to... Well, we'll post this to the liner notes for this show, but basically the instructions will be, over the next month or so, record your pitch, and send us the file. And I can work with you to get the file. It's not a problem. If you don't know how to send it, we'll put an FTP information up online. You can send it to us this way. If it's 2 minutes of recording, you should be able to mail it. If not, work with me. I could perhaps do a Skype session where I actually record it for you as well. So I'll be working with you guys. Once we get all these pitches in, I'll put them all together as a pitch show, basically back to back. So next week, what we'll have is from K.M. Hirosaki and Kyell, an example of a pitch to kind of help you guys figure out, the format and what you're trying to do.
Yep. And do you want them to contact you just through the unsheathedpodcast@gmail.com address, or do you want to set up a different one?
You can send it there, or you can email me at kit@kylegold.com.
Okay. So if you're confident in your recording and you just want to record your pitch and send it in,
Yep.
just send it to unsheathedpodcast@gmail.com. If you need technical assistance or you have questions or anything like that, send inquiries to kit@kylegold.com. That's
Yep.
KIT at KYELLGOLD.com.
Exactly. And this can be a pitch for a novel, a short story, a comic book. And also, I want to be clear that this is more of an exercise in pitching. It's not that if you're going to pitch us things, we're necessarily then going to do something with them.
We're not promising to edit your novel.
Yeah,
Right.
we're not
Or read your novel or care about your novel.
However, our show will be online, so
Yeah.
if
Yes, exactly. What we will be doing is encouraging lots of people to come in and listen to that episode and listen to those pitches.
right.
And they'll be like, by golly, I think that sounds like a gold mine. That little product you put together is a real humdinger.
Now let me get back in my time machine and go back to 1930 and invest in it.
Oh, Biff Tannen.
Thanks, Kyle.
Sure. Well, thank you for joining us, and we're going to draft you to help us read and answer some questions while we're at it.
Most excellent.
If your pitch is ridiculous, I reserve the right to laugh about it behind your back off the air.
We may actually laugh on the air.
We may. We will have to see how we put it together, whether we want to do a, maybe the three of us will select the best pitch, and then maybe we'll laugh about all others on the subsequent show.
Look at what this person thought was worthy of Unsheathed.
So keep in mind when you're sending your pitch in, you are putting it out there in the public, and
It's like asking a girl out to prom, or asking a guy out to prom.
it's like asking a guy or girl out to prom at a school assembly on stage in front of the entire high school, being videotaped.
So it's like the end of an 80s teen romance movie.
Yes, exactly. It's too bad John Hughes is dead. That would be a great elevator pitch for him.
I would pour out this glass of wine in his honor, but it's the last of the bottle, so I won't. It's a delicious 2008 Cakebread Cellars Merlot.
And I'm back on the Coke Zero myself. Kit, what are you drinking today?
Cakebread, if you want to write me a check.
Drinking a 2011 Crystal Geyser orange flavor sparkling mineral water.
Geyser, by the way, is a borderline word to use in an adult story.
There is a slang term in Japanese which means geyser, but it is also a rude slang term for female ejaculation.
Wow.
Yeah. That's the first and probably last time we will ever talk about that on Unsheathed.
I'm just trying to think of a way to work in a brothel where one of the women's nickname's Old Faithful. But
See, but now if I'm
think
thinking of
that's
like
pretty bad.
a woman of ill repute named Old Faithful, I think it's something completely different.
yeah, so do I.
Old Reliable. Old Ironsides.
She ain't that pretty, but she gets the job done.
Oh, hookers.
Live hookers. I hasten
now.
to point out
I don't know. Old Reliable doesn't sound like she'd be around much longer.
I don't know. Those old Ironsides keep chugging along for a while.
Can we please move on to the next part of the discussion, Kyle?
Please, before I bring up the name Mary Mac.
Ah! No!
Sorry, obscure Civil War reference. I'm going to, since you've been already reading the second letter, I'm going to let you read the second one, and I think I will let Kit read the third one, so I will take the first and fourth. So here we go. Hey there, Sheathers. I've been working on my novel a bit over the past month or so, and after starting the beginning over again on Candrill's suggestion, I have to say that I'm having difficulty with it. Now, the main thing that concerns me is a bit of advice that Candrill gave to me. He said, show, don't tell. And after having me rewrite my beginning a few times, I can see the difference. But it's not easy to keep it going. Sometimes it's just the slightest difference. Now, when I'm able to ask Candrill, he can easily point out to me how I should change my tells into shows, but I need to be able to do so on my own. So do you have any advice as to how I can best tell the difference between telling and showing in my novels? Your aspiring novelist, J. Hopkins, a.k.a. Cy the Cheetah.
Hey, Cy.
Hi, Cy.
Cy.
So, show and tell is one of those old saws that's actually, people kind of go through stages, at least my experience is people go through stages with it in their writing. Like, initially, I thought, okay, show, don't tell, and I thought I understood what it meant. And then I went through a phase where I thought, but sometimes you have to tell, because showing is so inefficient. And then I went back on it and said, actually, there are rare times where telling, like if you're in summary rather than scene, you kind of want to, you have to tell, but that all gets back to the choice of, are you doing summary or are you doing scene? And if it's something that's important enough to be a scene, then you kind of, you want to show. This is not a great rule or anything.
Yeah.
But I will say that if you're using the verb to be, like if you're writing in past tense and you're using was or were, that is an indication that you're telling. It's not the case all the time by any means, but it's mostly like,
don't take that as a 100% thing. Cause
right. It's
my brain is going to start pulling up examples, and I don't want to do that because I'll just muddy the issue.
Right. But the idea is that you don't want to say something like, Cy the Cheetah was happy to hear his letter read on Unsheathed, because then what you're doing is telling the reader this was his state of mind, and the reader doesn't have to do any work.
Yeah. But if you say, like, you know, he perked his ears up and his tail started lashing about as he heard his letter read, and you're like, okay, cats do that when they're happy, right? Are cats ever happy? What do they do?
I don't know. I think they stare at things on walls when they're happy.
I think cats purr.
Oh, there you go.
But don't cheetahs not purr?
Are cheetahs cats?
I know cheetahs don't retract their claws.
They're semi-retractile.
Are they?
Yes.
I thought they were non-retractile.
I think they're just semi.
Oh, okay.
Oh, wait, they can't roar. I know that.
Yeah, they can't roar, but I don't think they purr.
Do they? I don't know.
Anyway, the difference is,
if you know what sound a cheetah makes, tell us.
If you're describing what's going on and forcing the reader to interpret what's going on, then you're showing.
Yeah.
If you're simply explaining what's going on, then you're telling. And the reason you don't want to do that is because you want to engage the reader. You want to make the reader work a little bit, because then they're more invested in the story.
Yeah. That's good advice all around. Actually, a really good example on that, and to sort of bring it on to what our show is nominally about. Like, if you're writing a sex scene, one of the things, like, just describing what sex is like is really boring really fast. Like, if you're older than 14, like, reading, and then he stuck himself into the fox and thrust, and it felt good, like, that's going to, you know, there's not appeal. You need to sort of, you know...
It's kind of like watching porn. It's fun the first few times when you turn 18, and then it becomes old real fast.
Then to make porn fun, you have to watch it and rewind. Then it's hilarious. Then it's entertaining for reasons that are completely non-sexual, but it's way more entertaining.
And by porn, I should clarify that I mean pornographic videos, like movies.
Don't read stories backwards.
Right.
And don't look at pictures on FA upside down. That won't really do any good.
No, but you can flip them.
You can't, and then you can see where the artist made all their anatomy mistakes.
Oh, it ruins the magic.
But anyway,
as you're saying.
Yeah, as I was saying, getting into the emotional reactions of the participants, getting into how they react physically when certain acts are performed or when certain things are, done to them. That is sort of that's what makes sex interesting to experience vicariously. If I can say that. Would you say that that's fair? Okay.
I think so. Yeah, and again, it's one of those things that you see in movies a lot, and I'm trying to think of a movie I saw recently that we could, I don't think we necessarily 100% agreed on this, but Kit and I saw Thor, and you saw it also recently, but separately, and one of the issues we had with Thor was Natalie Portman meets,
Chris Hemsworth.
Chris Hemsworth, right. I can remember the name of the female actress, but not the guy with the chest. Natalie Portman meets the guy with the chest, and
Chris Hemsworth.
And then at another point in the movie later, she's in love with him. And essentially what happens is we're told she's in love with him.
Yeah. And that's pretty much that.
And that's the difference between showing and telling is basically that. If you saw Thor, there's a transition, and now we're told something happened so that she's in love with him, and it's not very fulfilling because you don't know what it is that he did, apart from having really nice chest, that made her fall in love with him, and maybe that was enough. But then you don't know why she reacted the way that she did.
Right? Yeah. I mean, the problem there is twofold. One is that it was shoehorned into a story that didn't need it, and two, it was poorly set up and barely, if at all, justified.
But it's sort of a cinematic analogy to the show rather than show.
Yeah, no, and actually, my housemate and I were talking about Thor the other night because we actually saw X-Men First Class together, which is a much better movie. It is much more enjoyable and coherent as a film. And I know you haven't seen it, so I won't give spoilers, but we were basically talking about, now that we've seen X-Men First Class, let's talk about everything that Thor did wrong. And so, yeah, I mean, it was a fun action movie. It wasn't a good film, is my, rundown of Thor.
No, I agree with that. It was very pretty. I loved Loki, but it told you a lot.
Yeah.
It didn't have a lot of emotional buildup.
And then it has problems with what it doesn't tell you. Like, he's fallen into the Odin sleep. And it's like, okay, does this happen a lot? Do you not have a plan for how the line of succession works when he just sort of falls unconscious? Like, has this never happened before? You make it sound like this has happened before, but you don't seem to have a contingency for it. Why is that? Tell us, movie. Or, better yet, show us, movie.
Exactly. Also, with that excuse, I'm going to tell my Thor joke real briefly.
Okay.
Which was that when Loki was riding Odin's horse, Sleipnir, I really wanted Sleipnir to turn around and say, "Mom, get off my back!"
Norse mythology, I love it.
Norse mythology humor. So I think we could probably do an entire show on show don't tell.
Yeah, it is one of the big maxims of writing,
and it's one of the ones that people tend to kind of misinterpret a lot.
It's up there with Murder Your Darlings.
Yeah, not as much as Murder Your Darlings, but yeah, they have people sort of are like, but I have to tell. I'm telling a story. I'm not showing a story. And anyway,
but yeah,
we've made our position clear. So read for us our following next person.
Okay.
Letter.
Dearest tidings to you, sly, sleek, and silence. Oh, don't call him silence. The silence are terrifying.
And he's not silenced this episode.
No, he's not. So he can't be. God, the silence are possibly scarier than the weeping angels. I'm not sure.
Doctor Who.
I'm glad you caught that.
Fuzzwolf tweets about it all the freaking time,
true.
So it's hard not to.
The mid-season finale was so good. I, Elijah Lapso, do hereby send you this email in hopes of seeking a bit of knowledge from of you. I don't think that scans.
From the three of you.
Oh. That would make a lot more sense. From the three of you. Sorry, Lalapso, I messed your sentence up. Yes, even you, good Sir Kit. Below you shall find my questions and whom they are directed towards. Should that be to whom they are directed? With that said, if anyone has something to contribute,
If you're going to nitpick all the
I
grammar in every
wholeheartedly
email, this is gonna
bequeath
take a
unto you
whole
the
hour.
knowledge. Ooh, bequeath. That's a good word. That I wish to know any thoughts or additions that may come to the minds of the cast. As a beginning writer with hopes of one day seeing my notations in printed form, I would be most unwise to deny myself the chance to seek knowledge for some of the greatest literary minds in the fandom.
And since
So
they're not
why are
here,
you
we'll
emailing
answer-
us?
We'll answer on their behalf.
With that said, let my questions commence. My first question is for KM. Dearest Otto, when you are approaching a scene in which knowledge the reader has yet to acquire is needed, do you think... Apparently, reading this email more carefully in advance would have been needed for me. Do you find it best to inform them of the required information prior to that scene, or simply leave them wondering until such time as you choose to let them know what is really happening behind the scenes? Should I read these all and then we'll cover them?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's because I'm having a hell of a time reading this, apparently. To Kyell, I seek knowledge of how to go about inserting detail into... Sorry. I just saw inserting into places, and I was like, oh, that's about inserting detail into my stories in places where they would otherwise be lacking.
Use lots of lube.
There's no such thing as too much lube. Oftentimes, I will come into a scene and find myself needing to add substance to the bulk of the text to help me better set a scene, and yet in many cases, I can't find any detail that the reader need honestly be aware of. How would you best resolve this issue? For you, Kit, I seek knowledge of wines, which, as of the time of my writing this letter, March 11th, 2011, I am unable to enjoy myself. Oh, wow. However, at the end of this year, I shall be of proper age
He's unable to enjoy the wines himself.
I was gonna say, if you have a problem with that, again, use lots of lube. Like Kyle said, come on.
Don't use a wine bottle yet.
Anyway, at the end of this year, I shall be of proper age to consume that forbidden drink. It's just a forbidden drink. And will be... this didn't print out right. Something celebrating with a fine
I
glass of
enjoy
wine.
celebrating.
Have you any suggestions to offer? I seek knowledge for a...
Friend
for
well.
when she admits to indulging in a glass of wine as a diversion from her studies. There you have it, my potentially pantsless and most certainly sheath-retracted friends. You're making a lot of assumptions there, Butto. A question for each of you in which the answer need not come from the one I specify. I hope all goes well with you in your secret mountain bunker, and I trust this email to arrive promptly. Aside, though it may not be answered promptly, despite the often shady connection I have here in my secret cornfield outpost. Best wishes, and keep those pants in the proper places. The floor. The ever-procrastinating Elijah Lapso.
All right. Well, question number one.
Question number one.
I think we've talked about this a little bit, but when you're writing a scene...
And the reader doesn't know things that they need to know.
Right.
This is something that you need to, if you're going to withhold information, it needs to be deliberate and not just because you haven't gotten around to mentioning it yet.
Right.
And, I mean, this falls
there
under...
also needs to be a point to withholding it.
Exactly. I mean, this definitely falls under the category of a literary technique that you need to learn how to use. You can't just wing it. It's like, I'm trying to think of a good example here. Where, I mean, it can be done for effect of surprising the reader. Where, for example, if you've started a scene and you haven't said who one of the participants is, maybe it's because you want them to assume that it's somebody else, and then when they do find out that it is somebody completely different, they're surprised. Or, maybe you're setting up a mystery and you have a discussion that happens at the beginning, which, upon a subsequent read-through, the context will make more sense, but if you knew who was saying this now, it would ruin, the mystery of, who's, conniving and doing this evil plot. Or, if, surprise, it's a girl, or something like that. And actually, you did that in the beginning Out of Position.
Right.
Surprise, it's not a girl.
And I would say, I don't know how much of a surprise it was to anyone who's familiar with my work, but...
didn't somebody email you saying, oh my god, you tricked me, and then it was hot?
I think more often I get surprised emails from straight people saying, "Oh my God, it was hot, and then you tricked me."
And now I'm confused. Yeah, like Tev, read the rest of the book to figure out how to deal with that.
Yeah. I think, as we talk about with the show Don't Tell, part of writing is you want to engage the reader, and if your story is basically, these people are plotting a murder. Here's these people plotting a murder.
Yeah.
Now these people are going to execute the murder. Here's these people executing the murder. Now these people are going to hide from the police. Here's the police looking for these people. It's not very engaging if the reader is spoon-fed every bit of information necessary to process the story every step of the way.
You need to eliminate the motive and construct an alibi.
Exactly. Crisscross. And you really want... what engages the reader is puzzles and trying to figure things out. And you don't that doesn't mean you start the story with something in which the reader has no idea what's going on.
Yeah, because that's frustrating more than anything.
But what you want is to create a little bit of tension. Let them know that something's coming up. Let them know that somebody is doing something a little bit out of the ordinary for some reason or another. And I think I'm kind of it feels to me like you're making some kind of mistake with the pacing in telling the story if you're approaching a scene in which the reader needs to know something that they haven't been told yet, and you haven't figured out how to tell them.
Yeah, and to use another analogy, and actually this was in something that I was just watching now, which this wasn't even intentional, but think about it if you're telling somebody a story and you get to a point where, the reader needs, information. Like, if you were like just telling somebody a story and then you stop and go, oh wait, in order for this next part to make sense, I need to go back and tell you this. Right. Like, I forgot to mention this. So let me stop and explain this so the next part makes sense. Yeah, you can't let yourself do that in writing. You need to find a way to thread the information in like organically and naturally earlier.
Right. And the reason it worked in the thing that we were watching is that it was specifically set up as a very fourth wall breaking narrative device,
which was done specifically for effect,
right?
Not because the people who wrote it actually forgot,
right? So I'm assuming, I'm going to borrow a little bit, but I'm assuming you're talking about a scene that's something like, I went to this party and I saw this girl that I recognized, and it was this girl who grew up in my hometown, and I haven't told you about my hometown or growing up with this girl. Then what you need to do is work that information in, or present it at the time it's needed. Like, if you're just following this guy around and he's got a life and everything, and he's whatever, and then he runs into this girl and be like, oh, it's so and so, it's you. We were 6 years old together in this grade school, and then the reader knows enough to understand what the relationship is, and they can go on with the story.
Yeah, I was actually just thinking, this was a few nights ago, about how there is information that we don't need to impart because we know the audience, and I was specifically thinking about things like, animal anatomy,
how sheaths work.
Well, like that, and like knots, where it's just like, when you're writing for furries, like we know, like you don't need to stop to explain what a knot is. It's just sort of like, okay, yeah, like that'll be there. And I just realized, like if some regular person picked this up and read it, they'd be like, wait, what's going on? What knot? Why are they stuck? Like, what's this all about? And
maybe I think some regular people do understand like dog anatomy.
Well, I mean, and the thing is, and I was also thinking about this in context of history of the furry fandom, and how there was a time, and not even that long ago, where like knots weren't necessarily the norm. I mean, even in like ASB, there was like a little sidebar at one point with like an asterisk note explaining like this is what a knot is and why it works, and like why this is an issue at this point. Because it's like even people who were reading furry comics like not necessarily know like what was going on.
Wow, did they have knots?
There was one story. I think it was one of the ones. I think it was like Terry Smith did an issue or something, and there was a scene where like they're having sex in the shower and they get tied, and then like somebody steals their stuff, so they have to run out into the hall, and it's comical because they're stuck together.
I think it was Teeny took a picture of them.
Yeah.
And they were like chasing after him.
And then was Ricky the raccoon? It's like Ricky Raccoon had like his little sidebar explaining canine anatomy to the audience.
Yeah, maybe that was it.
Yeah.
All right. Gotcha. I didn't think in the regular comic they had knots. I thought it was just human anatomy. But
Yeah, that's how they were usually drawn. But I think like for the joke of this particular issue to make sense, like it needed to be there. So they were like, "Hey, little flag."
all right. Kit, anything to add about foreknowledge required in scenes and whatnot?
I was busy thinking about wine, so
Okay.
I wasn't really listening.
And knots.
And now I'm thinking about wine and nuts.
So, all right. So the second one, detail into stories. I find it's the way your question's phrased is interesting, because you're like, I need to add substance to the bulk of the text to help better set a scene, but I can't find any details that the reader need honestly be aware of. So clearly, you realize that the scene is lacking in some details,
Right.
but you don't know which details are lacking. I mean, I would think if you're...
Yeah.
I think what I usually tell people when they ask about detail is, imagine yourself as the character walking into the scene. Like, you walk into a restaurant. What's the first thing you notice in the restaurant? Well, if you're walking in to get a table, the first thing you want to look for is the host stand.
Yeah.
Because you want to sign in and put your name down. If you're there to meet people, the first thing you do is scan the restaurant looking for the people.
Yeah.
But you'll notice the sounds.
Right.
There's usually, bustling sounds, the clinks of people eating,
Right. The smell.
the smells.
I was going to say, like, if you're impatient, probably the first thing you're going to do is, like, how many open tables do they have?
Right.
How long
Does
is it
it
going
look
to take to
crowded?
see this? Yeah.
And are there a ton of people waiting?
Yeah.
What's the lighting like? Is it bright? Is it dim? Are there decorations
There's a
on the
great
walls?
episode of Seinfeld for this.
Seinfeld 4?
Well, I think the episode might have come out before Eli Lapso was born, judging by if he's not old enough to drink wine.
It might have.
I feel old now.
No,
No, I know.
because it started in...
Like 93? 92?
It started in 92.
Early 90s. It wasn't 90.
No.
Because if 2000... Actually, he would have been born in 91 if he's turning 21
Yeah.
next year. It's close. It's cutting it close.
Yeah, because Seinfeld was like 91 or 92.
Yeah.
Because it ended before September 11th.
Yes, it did.
But Friends started in 94 and went through September 11th. And Friends was often mocked as being a copy of Seinfeld.
Right.
So I think it happened a couple years after that. I want to say Seinfeld started.
And the
in
Chinese restaurant episode was an early one.
It was an early one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was
it was
like
early season,
first or
so.
second season.
But I mean, the same thing applies to anything. So if you're wondering what things the reader needs to be aware of, it's basically like, what are the minimal details you need in order to set the scene? What are the most important things? Like, what would you want to know about the place the characters walked into?
Yeah.
Dimensions of the space, the light, the smells. Go through all the five senses is another one. What is the ground? Is the ground carpeted or tiled or ceramic or wood? Is the air warm?
Yeah.
Is it anything out of the
Yeah.
ordinary?
And again, like, if it's relevant.
Yeah.
If it's not relevant, you don't need to go into every detail. And also, I mean, there are some details that you can pull out as needed that you don't necessarily have to set up in advance. Like, I was just writing a scene the other day where, I mentioned a character taking something out of their shirt pocket. And I didn't mention earlier in the scene that, like, okay, they were wearing a shirt that had a pocket, which, I mean, that's something. Like, not a lot of shirts have pockets, but enough do.
Right.
But the fact that, like, oh, he's wearing a pocketed shirt, like, yeah, that wasn't, like, a detail that needed to be called out until he needed to reach into the shirt pocket.
Right. And another thing kind of to keep in mind is when you're writing a novel or a long story with several scenes, kind of consistency of the type of details throughout the story so that you can contrast. Well, the restaurant is bright and loud, and the library is dark and quiet, and the house is bright and quiet, and the same kind of details should be more or less consistent throughout the story.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say is keep in mind that level of detail is something that hinges very much on style.
Yeah.
Don't overload on the detail because you feel obligated to. I mean, like, I know, like, for my sake, I very rarely go into a lot of physical description.
Yeah, same
like,
here.
and like, you know, people say, hey, like, I went over to my friend's house for a party, and I'll talk about, like, hey, you know, there's people drinking, it's loud, folks are mingling, but I'm not, like, is it a one-story house or a two-story house? I don't know. I don't care.
But there are people who can do that. And,
exactly.
one of the things that struck me, I think this was in Palimpsest, Kat Valenti.
Shout out. If you haven't listened to episode 81, go back and listen to it. It's awesome.
It is awesome. 9 times 9. And
that's 2 more than 3 times 7.
Kat Valenti puts in a ton of detail into Palimpsest that are things that are probably not real relevant to the story as a whole, but they set the tone. And things like, you know, pear apple sparkling alcohol made from frozen winter pears, and you're just like, wow, that's all really cool.
Or she's talking about, like, the Beatles.
Yes.
And describing them as just like, it's just this, it paints this gorgeous mental image. But I mean, again, that's part of her style and it's part of the book.
And you can get away with writing longer descriptions when you have that facility of language to make the descriptions enjoyable to read. If you are not as good with descriptions, which I think is part of why I shy away from them, and you're saying, you know, he walked into the house. The house was a large house, and the floor was tiled with alternating black and white tiles, and the walls were wallpapered with a red wallpaper that had a gold pattern on it. And you're just like, oh my God, stop describing things and tell me what happened.
I actually think you did a really good job of describing, like, the big fancy house, and it was at McMiniver's place in Miracle on 34th Sheath. I'm so embarrassed to even say the name of that story. I hate you so much.
You could also note that same house is going to appear in an anthology that's being released at Anthrocon. The Fortune Teller's Poem Anthology. My story in that also...
Oh, God, you're right.
...has a scene in that
wow,
house.
It's been so long since I've read that story, I had forgotten.
I know. But, so, yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate that. And the bits that I've read of Summerhill, you know how much I like the descriptions in there, so...
There are parts I need to go back and add a lot more, but yeah.
Anything to add, Kit, before we let you talk about wine?
No, I was just thinking the last things you guys kind of talked about, where it's you can use the description to really help set the tone of the scene. You know, focus on the things of the character, like the character with the pocket in his shirt says a little bit about the character, and then you can use that. Is he a geek, or is he like trendy, or, you know, use those little details. Add what you need to do to kind of help flesh out the emotion, the character development, the space.
Okay.
But wine,
Wine.
which is really why we're all here. And generally, I find for brand new wine drinkers, their palates are not quite ready for the big cabs or the Bordeaux's.
Yeah, the big jammy California Reds.
Yeah, you have to work your way into those. So most of the time, people are into...
Again, Lou.
God, no.
I'm face palming right now, which is foreshadowing. You have to work your way into... I mean, most of the time they'll find they like the sweeter wines. Those are kind of the gateway wines. The sweeter wines are the ones that aren't as tannic or sour. So what I would probably recommend is, there's either really, really sweet wines like dessert wines, which may be too sweet, but those tend to be a little more expensive, and you don't really sit down with a big glass of dessert wine. You have a small,
like a cordial glass,
like 4 ounces or so. It's not like a wine you sit down and have during a meal. But there are white wines. And there are semi-sweet, and they're blush wines, actually. So white wines and blush wines are the two I'd recommend. On the white wines, I would recommend probably either a Moscato or a Viognier. Perhaps I wrote down a couple here. Oh, a Gewürztraminer would be a good one.
I was going to say Gewürztraminer or Riesling.
A Riesling is a good one as well.
Riesling is good. You can actually find a very good, like, nice, fruity, not too sugary Riesling that's not too cheap. If you look for, it's Chateau Saint Michel. You can usually get a bottle for around like anywhere between like $9 to $14 in that range. They'll usually have it at like Safeway or whatever your local supermarket chain is, if they sell wine in your state,
Right.
which in Massachusetts they don't. Like their Riesling
Probably in
is
most states
it's
with cornfields. I'm not sure.
yeah, it depends. That's probably on a county level, actually, out in the Midwest. I'm guessing.
Maybe state stores or
Yeah.
or something.
Well, I mean, if you have to go to a liquor store, again, Chateau Saint Michel, it's not like a high-end wine. You should be able to find it at a normal wine provider.
And I would say, true, also, if you really are starting out with wine, don't go and spend big bucks. You're not
Yeah.
really going to be able to appreciate the nuances of the expensive wines compared to
Yeah.
the K.M. Harasaki's range of like $9 to $14 is a pretty good range.
Yeah, and I mean, like Kit says, we could, come out with some like $40, like David Bruce Pinot Noir, which is probably going to be like $30, $40 a bottle, which is really good. But again, if you don't have the palate for like a sophisticated, like earthy red wine, you're probably just going to hate it. It's like coffee. Like until you've developed a taste for it, you won't like it, and you don't learn how to appreciate it until you've like drunk a lot of it.
So
This is why Kit and I pity Kyle.
So how does somebody work their way up to being able to appreciate that? What would be like the next?
Right.
Step.
So those would be some whites. There are some reds that are not too bad. You could go with a Shiraz
Yeah.
or a Syrah. Maybe a Merlot. Merlots tend to be very fruity.
Yeah.
So some Merlots are accessible again, but these are going to be a little drier, a little more tannic. So they're not. I really probably would recommend actually pairing those with food. Because again, don't just sit down with a glass of wine.
Especially red wine. Red wine, you definitely. I mean, white wine I think is more easy drinking than red wine by itself.
Yeah, certainly. You could sit with a bottle of.
I say
wine.
having just had 2 glasses of Merlot on their own.
Well, you're a sophisticated.
But I'm a sophisticated wine drinker.
There you go.
Or wine fag, as we call ourselves.
Is that different than a wine furfag? Or
Does that mean you're gay for wine?
I am gay for wine.
I would say I'm gay for wine as well. And then also blushes are a good one. So maybe it'd be white wines. The next one would be blushes, like a what did I write down here? A white Zinfandel is a good one. Basically, what some of the blush wines are, it's a red grape, except for they take the red skin off, so it's just the meat, and there's not a lot of contact. A lot of the contact is where you get the red colors and the tannins. So it's just the inside fruit in the juice. So go for a blush. That's not a bad one, and then work your way to some of the reds that we mentioned.
This is why, I think, white Zinfandel is always what I associate with, that's what people's moms drink, because it is sort of it's a wine that non-wine drinkers will drink.
Yeah, get it in a classy box.
Yeah.
Put it in
Franzia,
the refrigerator.
A la Kevin Smith.
the best-selling wine in the world. If you want to look for a specific blush or rosé, Little Penguin has a rosé of Syrah, or it's a rosé of Shiraz. Shiraz and Syrah are basically the same wine, but depending on where it comes from, that's why it's hard to keep them straight. So if we use them interchangeably, that'll happen. Another one, if you're going to a good, nice, affordable, not too bad table red, which is easier on the palate if you're not into the dark, bitter sort of wines. Yellowtail does a Shiraz Grenache. It comes in sort of this bright, magenta label. It's probably $8. I would probably serve it with pasta or something, again, with food. But that was my standard, to make sure I at least have a bottle of wine in the house, that would be what I would have around. And I think that's a pretty easy drinking red wine that's affordable.
I think K.M. and I should have our own little wine show here.
Oh, yeah.
We have a wine corner. It's like every Unsheathed has our 10-minute wine
God,
corner.
my housemate just went up to Napa the other day, and I was invited, but I was busy.
I picked up this amazing cab 3 weeks ago up there. Hawk, I think it was.
Oh, really?
It was really good.
Oh, God. He picked up a bottle of the late harvest Sauvignon Blanc from Honig. I'm going to be so excited to
one's
drink
awesome.
that. Oh, it's one of my favorites.
Which goes into the last one, which are the dessert wines. I talked about them a little bit.
Dessert
Certainly,
wines are expensive.
They can be very expensive. You don't want to get them too syrupy. One of the interesting things about dessert wines is if you keep them long enough, and by long enough, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, especially this late harvest, the Honig one, it starts out as a kind of a yellow, brightish sun color, but it ages into this gorgeous golden amber.
Yeah, it turns this nice, fierce amber color. But it tastes like honey and sex. It is so good.
But by the time it gets to that amber, though, it does almost become too sweet. So you need
to know when to drink it. Let it age a year and a half. I wouldn't go more than 2.
Yep. So that's our wine corner.
You guys should have a little wine cast.
Dude, we could do it on Sheath Presents.
And we should
Kit and K.M. talk about wine. I will totally do that with you.
Is going to be busy for a good chunk of the summer, so maybe we'll have.
Dude, we will totally do that. It'll be a great excuse for me to hang out in your mountain bunker and get drunk with you.
There you go.
Thank you for asking that question, Eli.
Yes, thank you,
now
Eli.
I actually absolutely want to do that now.
So Eli, let us know when you have your first bottle of wine later this year. Let us know what it is and how you liked it.
Yep. And like giving a blowjob, if you don't like it at first, don't worry, keep trying. You'll learn it.
Yes. Also, like, I'm not going to crude up this podcast any more than it already was.
I was going to say, if you want to, for reference, I took to sucking dick like a pro from moment one, so...
I was just going to say there's other elements of the gay experience that also take some getting used to, but...
I tell you, don't start with a wine bottle.
Yeah, not with the wine bottle. Always more lube.
No, just don't. Nothing involving glass, ever.
So apparently they did give me a question to read. A letter to read. And I don't know if it's a trend in Unsheathed. I just haven't noticed, but it's a wall of text. I think it's the longest one of the 4. So thank you.
We didn't ask you to read it backwards, so there's at least that.
From Graphy. Hello, fine sirs. Once again, I think he's confusing the show, but Mr. Kyell, Mr. K.M, and Mr. Kit. Greetings from the other greetings from the other side of the pond, and then some, from Finland. I was encouraged.
Finland.
They call it Swami.
The country where
I was encouraged to write this email after sending Kyell a message about how much I was inspired after reading Isolation Play. And friendly Kyell also told me that if I had any further questions, I should relay them to the podcast. So, of course, after binging After binging on Unsheathed and trying to come up with something sensible to say, I took up the offer and decided to compose a little bit of a letter for you folks.
Friendly Kyle is my good twin.
Are you evil, Kyell? First off, an anecdote about what happened to me after listening to Unsheathed. I had a slow day at the college, and I was just relaxing on the computer and listening to a couple of episodes of the podcast. Then I just happened to find out that NASA is launching the space shuttle during the same evening, my time. Thus, I spent the evening listening to the super serious Mission Control live audio feed and cracking up the process because after listening to Unsheathed for a few hours and then listening to the NASA audio, my brain kept wondering when the next blowjob-related joke would show up. Unfortunately, the public affairs officer's voice didn't have the sexy twang like Kyle's, so pretty much I kept imagining it as being Mr. Hirosaki doing a funny voice. Much collateral damage from listening to Unsheathed.
I'm Lovejoy Weasel, and I'm going to launch the biggest rocket ever.
Now I'm just imagining the countdown. Oh God, 10, 9, 8. I'm sorry.
5, 4. Oh God, no. 1.
Lift off so close.
Like a volcano. Or a geyser.
Oh God, close your eyes. I'm sorry.
What I wanted to be the main point of my email was a writing-related question / food for thought. Now, I know that all writers need a kind of learning period before we can attain the skills needed to write something the others might actually enjoy reading. I personally practiced for 11 years out of my modest age of 21 before I felt confident enough with my skills to actually post something online and see what people would say about it. For much of those years of learning, I've worked on and off on a sort of hardcore sci-fi. Is that like hardcore porn, or?
I think it's more as opposed to soft sci-fi.
Right.
Like Kim Stanley Robinson instead of Star Trek.
I'll go with the hardcore porn sci-fi story.
Yeah.
Otherwise, why he'd be listening to Unsheathed?
Kim Stanley Robinson as opposed to Ursula Le Guin. Ursula Le Guin's who I always go to for soft sci-fi.
Oh, okay. All right.
Isn't Mr. Asimov the...
George Lucas.
Asimov's like the hard sci-fi, yeah.
Hardcore sci-fi?
Clark is more softy.
He's more about the human condition.
Yeah. He's like middle of the road.
I've never shown... That's a hardcore sci-fi story, which I've never shown to anyone, nor ever tried to even think that it could be something I'd share. I only have material for about 2 years back, and I'm bound to cringe at it, because of the level of quality was obviously developed for... Wait, I said that weird. Because the level of quality has obviously developed from even that, let alone if I should go further. That aside, I would like to pose the question to you folks. It's all bold. How long did you enjoy writing just for yourselves before you felt confident enough to try and see what others liked about it? What kind of stuff did you work on, and do you consider that work an old shame, to quote TV tropes, or something you can regard with fondness, the likes of, I used to write like that? That was my writing-related question. I could go on making a whole load of questions about isolation play, such as how it left so many red herrings out in the open. But I'd like more to be remembered as having actually said something productive and useful. So I'll keep those happily to myself. I'd like to send the best wishes to all of you there, especially Mr. Kit. Thank you.
Aw.
Whom I keep imagining as this figure sitting behind his computer with headphones and face-palming quietly every now and then. I'll cut the...
It's probably more often than you think, actually.
It's multiple times each episode. I'll cut the complimentary OMG crap out of the end of this message and just say thanks and cheers. Graffy. I think Graffy is a first-time writer.
I believe he is.
Thank you for writing, Graffy.
And he's perfectly free to send questions. We appreciate him keeping the isolation play questions off the podcast, because I usually just answer those on my journal or whatever. And we try to spend time talking about more general.
Well, plus we don't want to spoil it for people who have not read it.
I will say at the very beginning of the episode where he read the introductory salutation where he said, I was inspired after reading Isolation Play, my mind still blown. It's like, oh, right, Isolation Play is like actually out now, and people can and spend like that for like half a year. And like I was so used to it just being this book that you were working on for the longest time that I forget that people have actually read it.
Yeah, wait till whatever the Collations book comes out. That's going to be even more confusing because
my God,
such a long run up to it.
Yeah.
What kind of amazes me is I'm like, oh yeah, Isolation Play was just released this year, because it feels like forever ago, but it was just January.
Yeah.
And I'm so far away from that world now, and not forever.
Fuck you, Devon Lee. You're done.
And I'm going back. No. I'm actually having fun with the plotting for the third book. But anyway, feel free to send me your Isolation Play questions. I post them to my live journal every now and then, and when people send me them in private, I'll answer them in public. But
yeah. Send him the questions, don't send the podcast the questions.
Right.
I didn't write Isolation Play. And
Kyell at KyellGold.com.
I'm painfully aware that I don't have Kyell's 8 novels out in the market, so don't make me feel bad.
But how do you guys feel about his question?
How long was I writing just for myself? I was writing the first story I can remember writing and finishing was in college, and I wrote and finished it because we had I fell in with some people who were doing a science fiction magazine, and they said, hey, we need a story. And I said, hey, I think I can write a story. So technically, I have no idea how I did write some stuff before that I didn't show people. But it wasn't a very long time. But I don't know. I'd always just enjoyed writing, and I thought, here was a supportive group of friends, and I showed them the story, and they thought it was good enough to put in the magazine. So, certainly wasn't 11 years.
Oh, God. For me, I remember writing stories from myself as early as elementary school. I remember in 4th grade, we had these little computers that they let us take home for an afternoon, and it was basically just a overglorified word processor. I don't even remember what kind it was.
Oh, I remember those.
It was clunky. It looked like a modern laptop, only it weighed about like 20 pounds.
Was it a Wang?
It might have been.
Believe it or not, there was a manufacturer of computer equipment who went by the name Wang.
Oh yeah, my housemate collects Wangs.
Very.
He also loves cock too. Like, really. Anyway. But no, like, that was like 4th grade. And actually the story I wrote was about a talking dog. I believe it was called The Talking Dog, in fact.
Nice.
It was about, like, me and my friend down the street and his dog learned how to talk. So, yeah, right out the gate, furry! I remember writing stories in middle school and printing them out and just bringing them to school with me, and people ask me, like, oh, what's this? Like, oh, it's a story I wrote. They're like, oh, what class is this for? And I'm like, it's not. And they're like, why would you write something that's not for class? I'm like, because I wanted to.
Did you share them with people?
A few people. Oh god, that was the other thing. When I was in like high school and whatnot, I would be writing on the computer, and like anytime. And all right, I want to point out this is before the internet. All right, this is pre-internet, so I'm dating myself. Like, I know a lot of people, when you were like 16, 17, you were probably used to this, but like anytime like my parents would walk by when I was on the computer, I would reach out and stab the monitor button and turn the monitor. This is back when monitors had separate buttons.
Right.
And I would turn my monitor off.
Do if you have desktop.
Yeah, but I would turn the monitor off when they were walking by so they couldn't see me. And like it was like super suspicious, and they're like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm writing something and I don't want you to see it." And they'd be like, "Okay." And like, you know, I'm sure that there's plenty of people where it's like, "Oh god, porn," click. But it wasn't even that because we didn't have the internet.
Right.
We had to find old copies of Hustler that, like, you know, crazy people would leave up in the park.
Yeah. I didn't even have that. I didn't have a park near my school where crazy people would leave porn.
It only happened like
I'm trying to remember
twice.
what I did for porn. Oh yeah, I read science fiction books.
My uncle had some nudie playing cards in his basement, so we would go over to his house and look at those.
My parents had a liquor
until all the
cabinet in
parents
their
found
basement.
us and made us all sit down and have an awkward chat.
So what about you, Kit? Did you ever share any of your early writing with people? A few of our listeners have asked what you write, and I think we've told them from time to time, but you don't do a lot, but you've done some.
I've written some short stories. I actually graduated with a creative writing degree, which I realized I qualified me for absolutely nothing. Maybe my parents. I actually specifically don't recall. There wasn't a lot of venues where I could kind of show it to people. And by the time I was at the point where I was writing more, it was in college where you had to show it to people. So,
Right.
Yeah.
I think that I kind of went directly into that.
Cool. Yeah, and I kind of view my old work with fondness. I mean, I go back and look at some of the older stories I wrote, and I cringe at some of the stylistic parts of them, but I still like the cores of the story. The stories obviously had some kind of appeal or meaning to me for me to sit down and spend the time to write them, especially back when writing was a little more of a struggle than it is now. Which I say only because I've practiced a lot. So
I still have on an external hard drive my first attempt at a novel from like over 10 years ago. I tried writing it 3 times. I had like 3 partial drafts done. It's terrible.
yeah,
I will never let anyone read it. I go back and look at it and I like face palm. But you know, every so often I will pull it up and read it, and just like it's funny to see what I did know how to do right back then. Like there are things that I do. It's like I didn't think I knew that long ago.
yeah,
And then a lot of it's just like, oh god, no.
yeah. I have 2.
Also, you can really tell that I was like just still coming to terms with my sexuality when you're reading it.
Yeah, I have 2 novel drafts that I've shown various people, but they're not in any state that I would ever publish them. And going back to make them publishable would essentially mean I'd have to rewrite them, and I've got too many other things that I'm excited about writing. So.
Yeah, this one here, if I ever did try to go back and rewrite it, it's not something I'm interested. It's not a story I'm interested in telling.
Right.
Although someone does die in it.
There you go.
Somebody falls down the stairs and breaks their neck. And another person gets, like, separated from his friend. I'll tell you little pieces of it. So you have these 2 best friends in high school. This is before they're gay for each other. They don't discover they're gay for each other until later. Unlike a lot of furry stories where that's the first thing they discover, that's not until, like, way later. But one of them, he's the fox is the new kid in school, and he doesn't have a lot of friends, but he has this one wolf friend. And then there's, like, the other wolf bully who's picking on him, and he keeps like picking on him, and like the other friend like doesn't step in, and eventually there's like he's like shoving around in the bathroom, and so the fox just like goes nuts and tackles him and like starts like slashing at him with his claws and actually takes this bully wolf's eye out. And so he gets like his parents like send him to reform school in another country.
Wow.
And like the 2 of them, the fox and the wolf, they end up like at different times dating the same girl because she's part of a military family and she moves around. So they both date the same girl and don't know it, and that they don't find this out until after they're gay for each other. and I don't know where the rest of the story was supposed to go from there.
Wow.
Although the girl that the wolf originally had a crush on, when he met this fox boy, like, she ends up slipping down the stairs and breaking her neck in a freak accident for no reason.
Nice.
Her name was Rosalind. She was a squirrel.
I would think they'd be more delicate on their feet. Squirrels.
It's just more like, I'm going to kill her to make this character suffer. Wow. Even from a young age, that was my thing. Okay, that's the thing, though. All right. Remember how I went through and counted my stories for how many were sad and how many were miserable? So again, I made a tweet about how my story in the anthology that's coming out at Anthrocon, actually, no, it's one that's in Heat, which is also coming out at Anthrocon, and it's an anthology, sort of. But I tweeted that it's probably one of the Hirosaki-est stories I've ever written. And then, like, a bunch of people asked, like, oh, so how many people die? First of all, when you explain the joke, it's not funny. But I went through and...
Thanks, Twitter.
Yeah, thanks, Twitter. Thumbs up. But I went through and I looked at my SoFurry/Yifstar account, because the stories have all carried over. And I have 46 stories on there. Like, there's one story that's on there where somebody dies. And she doesn't even die. She gets turned into a statue. So I don't know why I have this reputation for killing off characters.
I don't think
except for the squirrel who broke her neck in the story I had ever finished.
I don't think it's so much killing off the characters, at least not physically.
But people
their
say...
souls,
But the point is, people
their
say...
hearts.
Yeah. No, I have a reputation for killing off characters, and I don't even do that.
No, you don't. I will say that in both of the unpublished novels, people died.
Yeah. Good on you. Did anyone lose an eye from a fox just trying to defend himself?
No. No.
Okay.
So that's yes, Kit. You can talk. You know.
Oh yeah, so we're at about the 60-minute mark. So let's wrap this up.
Kit is still making hand signals there.
I
So
do want to save this
front of his muzzle.
fourth email for another issue.
Yeah, we're gonna save it.
It's a good one. Although it would be great because this would have been 2 emails in the same episode where you got called Sly.
It is. The greeting in this one was Slick and Sly, which is very nicely actually assonant. So,
do you remember the old slip and slide
yes,
jingle? I was just thinking that.
Yeah.
Slick and slide. Sorry.
Right.
We can cut
Again,
this kid, right?
No such thing as not enough lube. So
I was going to say, like, slick and slide. That's just like, where's my greeting? Oh,
But
boosh. I have been K.M. Hirosaki. You can find me on Twitter, LiveJournal, and FA as K.M. Hirosaki.
And I'm Kyle Gold on Twitter, Kyle Gold on LiveJournal, Kyle on FA.
And this is Kit, Kit Silver on Twitter, kit@kylegold.com for email.
And you can email our podcast at unsheathedpodcast@gmail.com. We promise to read your letter at some time in the following 2 years.
Don't make that promise.
Okay, we don't promise to read your letter.
We'll try our best.
I did my best.
Occasionally, we're going to have to, I think, do another lightning round sometime in the next, probably sometime late summer, early fall to catch up again because people sent us a whole crap load of emails in May. Anyway, thank you for your letters. We've enjoyed the show. Thank you, Kit, for joining us on mic this time.
Thank you for inviting
This is
me.
an informative episode.
It is always lovely to hear your voice, and we look forward to your wine episode. We look forward to the pitch show next time. This is Kyle Gold wishing you good night and keep writing.